Welcome to Upper Room Chats with Bud and Sue. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. I am recording summaries and introductions to each chapter of my book, More Than Conquerors. And we're going to talk about that summary and digest it together. So if you have not seen that video, please go to our YouTube channel, Upper Room Chats, and look up the video More Than Conquerors Chapter 2, and the title is The Meaning of Life. That's the title for Chapter 2 in the book. And that whole book talks about why love is the meaning of life. It talks about how it transforms us, and it talks about what inhibits the receiving and expression of love in our lives, and it talks about what increases the expression of love in our lives and our relationships. So, you want to dive in? I'm ready.
Let's dive in. Let's dive in, unpack it. Yeah, I had lots of questions when I watched the video.
Okay, great. Let's see what we can do.
Well, I'd love for us to talk a little bit more in depth about the concept that if someone has more fear, right? If somebody's identity, because I think the new thought for me is to think about my fears being based on my identity versus, you can't just have a fear of snakes, or you can have, but we're not talking about those kind of fears, right?
We're talking about what Romans 8:15 calls a spirit of fear. Of habitual fear. So it's an oppressive fear that's a part of our identity. It's embedded in our identity.
Okay, which I think is a little different than just being afraid of a particular whatever.
Right.
Something.
This is a habitual fear that we're enslaved to.
Okay. All right, so that's a good working definition. So when we're talking about someone who has embedded fear as part of their identity, okay, then you were saying, I believe in the other video, that the more fear, then the less capacity for love the person can love, which to me is a great motivator to try to get to those root things in my own identity that causes fear, because in my head I want to say, well, I'm very loving.
Which you are, actually.
but and maybe I'm not thinking in terms so much of current times, although right now I mean we could have a whole conversation on, fear of COVID, right, and how that's driving people's decisions, right? Mm-hmm. But that seems maybe a little bit more unique to the times, but maybe not. Maybe because there may be more people, some people would be more afraid because of the embedded things in their own identity that are more fear-based.
Exactly. So the more someone is enslaved to a spirit of habitual fear, so this is a prevailing spirit of fear, then the more reactive they're going to be to things like COVID and getting sick or whatever else you would be afraid of, right?
Because there's healthy fear and there's wisdom. And I think where I get tripped up, and maybe others do as well, is determining is what my reaction to fear, is that born from something deeply embedded in me, or is this something that is a point of just wisdom? And am I even making sense?
Yeah, totally.
So
right.
How do you determine that?
So let's differentiate between, you called it healthy fear, okay?
Right.
So that's like I'm taking a walk down a trail and a grizzly bear jumps out in front of me, right? So that's a survival instinct. That's a healthy fear of something that really can destroy me, right? A grizzly bear could certainly do some harm, right?
Yeah, that's not unhealthy.
Right, and that's our fight or our flight instinct. So some people will want to run away from that, and some people would, go to their primal instinct and take on the bear, right? And so that's just a difference in personalities as well. But what we're talking about here, the difference between what you would call a healthy fear that helps you to stay alive, right? We're talking about a constant state of fear.
Okay.
And it has to do, it's a constant state of fear, or what by the scripture says, a spirit of fear that enslaves us. And it has to do with always looking for this sense of what I deserve, which is not good. It's not something good I deserve. It's because we have such a sense of lack of value, and our identity is so steeped in shame and in guilt. We're always anticipating bad. We're anticipating some form of tragedy, some form of something being taken away from us because it's what we deserve. And that is what Scripture calls being enslaved to a spirit of fear. So this is why in the book of 1 John it says, perfect love casts out fear, but the one who fears is not perfected in love, because fear has to do with this consciousness. I'm ad-libbing this, but it's a consciousness of deserving punishment and condemnation. It's a consciousness of unworthiness.
So a thought pattern, because I mean, this is all well and good in the theory. It's like, how do you parse this out in real life so that you can identify it in yourself? And I'm thinking, so a thought pattern would be, I don't deserve good things to happen to me. Bad things always happen to me because I deserve those bad things.
Yes.
So that would be something in that vein.
Right.
What if you're not conscious of those kind of thought patterns, but you still may have a spirit of fear? Like, what would that look like?
So we see the symptoms of that in the emotions we feel.
Okay.
And we see the symptoms of that with our reactive behavior.
Okay. The strength of our reactions.
Mostly in relationship. So when we're living under a bondage to a spirit of fear that enslaves us, we're so easily offended. We hold on to things forever. Bitterness is the poison we take, hoping it kills someone else.
Right.
There's that old saying,
right.
It's the poison we take, hoping it's going to kill somebody else, but it's poisoning your life. So these are the sort of symptoms, and the biggest symptom is non-love. The biggest symptom is value-taking.
Okay, so when you were talking about that in the prior video, that the more fearful you are, the less capacity you have for love. And I could only think about for myself in practical terms in my parenting. I feel like this is where my fears were probably the most evident. However, I could cloak them in terms of, well, I'm protecting my children.
Yes.
Right. So what I thought was loving very well may not have been very loving, because it was more about how do you say that word? Assuaging?
Assuaging?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Asuaging. Anyway,
yeah.
I know how to spell it. But consoling my own fears, versus what I was telling myself was, well, no, I'm protecting them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So in that case, I think it's sometimes you can cloak things in terms that look right, but underneath it, they're not.
Correct.
That's the tricky thing.
Right. And that's what I refer to in the video as our religious coping systems.
Okay.
So we create rules and we impose rules that help to alleviate our fears and our lack of sense of control because of those fears and this prevailing spirit of fear.
Right.
So we try to impose and create rules to help contain all that and alleviate all that. And now remember, this isn't a fear about specific things.
Right.
It's
an
a prevailing
overall
sense
feeling.
of fear.
Right. Which can manifest as anxiety,
Yeah.
just like a general
Anxiety, depression, anger, all negative emotions manifest
Which-
out of this.
It's really good that you term that as far as symptoms, because it's so easy to take that in itself and think that's the problem, when it's really just a symptom of something more than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So I'll give an example. You're talking about parenting. So in the home that I grew up, my mother wanted to really foster dependence in her children. Because if they were dependent on her, that meant they loved her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she thought she would, in her brokenness, she thought she was doing her best to love and protect. But what she was doing, she was fostering dependency so she would feel loved and needed and valued.
Which I think is so common.
Right. And in this system, this was her way of coping with her sense of lack of value, and she had good reasons based on what she experienced to feel that way. But in her need to cope with it, if you stepped out of that dependency, you got punished for it. And that, when you're a child, it's easy to see how you get punished. But as you grow into adulthood and you're striving to break out of that, it became rejection and manipulation and withholding to reinforce the rules that helped alleviate. And I love my mom, so I'm not being disrespectful
It's not about being
here.
blaming anybody.
No, but we do have to live in the truth to deal with these things, to protect her and feeling safe within this prevailing sense of fear. And so that's what happens. It starts morphing into our relationships with this need for control and this need to actually bring people we relate to in bondage to that same spirit and normalize it so that we can feel safer with it.
So one way to help identify this in ourselves is to be cognizant of when we're feeling that type of anxiety or whatever one of those symptoms might be. A strength of our reaction, albeit anger, fear, depression, anxiety, any of those.
Exactly.
And now obviously you can't I don't think you can put all of that in one basket, that it all leads to that we have some kind of spirit of fear, right? Because there's a myriad of things that can create those symptoms.
Well, when they're prevailing, yes, we're in bondage to a spirit of fear.
Okay.
When those are the prevailing things in our life, then yes, we can attribute it to that.
You can, okay.
Yeah. Now, it's not to say that we don't all struggle on some level with that. But what we're talking about when it's the predominant thing, the prevailing thing that gets exhibited in our interactions and relationships, then yes, that's what we can attribute it to. I mean, without a doubt, attribute it to that.
Wow. Okay.
So.
I guess. So then the question becomes, how do you start to? I know you said grace and all that, but how do you start stepping out of those patterns? Like, first you have to identify it, right? I've got a pattern. And is it just simply saying, okay, I've got some underlying spirit of fear? And when we say spirit, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Like, we're not saying like it's some a true spirit in the sense of like demonic or whatever. Are we saying that?
We're not talking about you have a specific demon harassing.
Right.
We're talking about like the spirit of this world. It's just prevailing.
Right.
It's so overtakes your thoughts and your thinking, and we actually become in bondage to it because it rules our thinking, our emotions, and how we interact with other people. And I think a good example from Scripture about this is what we saw with Jesus and his interaction with the religious leaders. They were in bondage to this very spirit, this prevailing spirit of fear, which caused them to create this incredibly rigid religious system. And they felt so threatened by Jesus as he was trying to help the people get out of this system, because he was actually expressing the true nature of God. They went to the extreme measure of murdering him and crucifying him on the cross
to protect the
system,
code,
right?
Their system,
protect their very system.
Yeah.
Now the cool thing about that is, in their crucifixion of Jesus and him being the sacrifice once and for all, that's the very thing in the spiritual realms that sets us free and gives us an awareness of grace, because the book of Hebrews says he made the sacrifice once and for all. Right. And so that's why we don't fear punishment, because he made the sacrifice once and for all. We don't constantly need to be striving and sacrificing and performing, because that's what Jesus accomplished on the cross, was fulfilling the requirements for that sacrifice.
Absolutely. So when we see these emotions that would manifest in behaviors like you talk about, protecting the system, you start to identify that. So then what's the next step? Like, how do you come out of that? And I still feel like it's sometimes it's tricky, because it's so part of who we are, that it's really, like, if somebody would have said in my 40s, like, Sue, you're being driven by a spirit of fear with your kids, I would have been like, no, I'm not.
You would have been offended.
I would have been totally offended. Like, no, I'm doing the best I can. I love my children, and I'm doing this, and this, so that they're, they don't have to be, they don't have to have the pressures of what the world's pushing on them, blah, blah, blah. I would have had really good answers, but I don't think I would have had any equipping at that point to really self-evaluate this. Right. So how do we get out of that?
Right. So it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Which is why we do this.
Start talking about it.
To help bring awareness.
Right.
And so as you start becoming aware, it's so easy to want to recoil from it.
Sure. Reject it. Deny it.
Right. And so I want to encourage you, if you're watching this and you start to have awareness based on these videos and discussions, don't recoil from it. Lean into it deeper.
And were you going to say something?
Yeah, because with the power and grace of God, this isn't so much a step 1, step 2, step 3 process.
Of course.
But the biggest part of the process is to move from working and trying to control it all, and realize I can't do it.
Right.
There's no way.
Right.
Now, if I think I can do it, that's what causes recoil from this, because my system's being threatened. But if I realize, no, it's hopeless, there's no way I can overcome this prevailing spirit of fear, and all that it produces in my life, and this incredible sense of shame and guilt, and this incredible sense of not having value because of all that. What we need to say is the truth. No, I can't change this. So awareness, accepting the truth, that I absolutely don't
Can't
have
do
any power to change this. It's way above my pay grade.
Right.
Right? Now what that leads us to, that leads us to look in a different way. So if I can't earn it and I can't control it, right? What's my only option? Well, maybe it's something that I can receive as a free gift.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what I turn to is quit earning and striving. And what I do is I start looking at what are the things that are inhibiting my ability to be a receiver of the very things that God has promised for me through His grace.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes this. It takes community. So if you don't have somebody that you can be honest with, that's step one. I feel like you know you can be honest with God, but then you need to have community that you can talk these things out. Dialogue, the logos, right? We talked about that in another video. When talking about COVID again, once we had a friend that got COVID and she got really sick. It triggered something in me. It was like, oh my gosh, I could get COVID and what would happen? And I found myself, I'm researching, but I found myself, it was a constant thing I was thinking about. And that was the self-check for me, that I'm consumed with this. So now I'm not in control of it or over it. It's over me. It's controlling me. And so that was a conversation I had to have with God. I actually, in a group that we're in, that we meet every Wednesday, I was completely honest with him and said, this has caused me to have fear. And I can't tell you when that change happened, but it did. All of a sudden that broke it. And it was, again, God, I don't have any control over any of this. I can do my part. Right? Because there's things we do have to be responsible with, right? We have to have wisdom, seek wise counsel, all those things. Once I'd done that, then it was like, okay, that's it. That's all I can do. Now, Lord, the rest of this is up to you. And again, it's this receiving of His grace, the peace. Like, I know when I've lost my peace that I need to do a check of something because something's not right. Right? I've stepped into fear or something.
Sure. So let's talk about this. So we do have a part, okay? When we're living in the grace of God as His child, as a receiver instead of an earner,
right?
There is a requirement for effort, but it's effort in the right things.
Right.
And the effort is what's blocking me from receiving.
Okay, let's say this again. Effort is what. So it's our partnership in this of saying, what is blocking me from receiving the grace that I need in this moment when I'm feeling out of control, fearful, etc.
Right. So to give you a picture of this, think of a prisoner with big steel bars and a big heavy door that has huge locks on it. And I am inside that prison. Okay, so that's like the spirit of prevailing fear, prison.
Locked in.
Okay? And I can do everything I want with the prison guards that are condemning me and telling me what a horrible person I am, and that's why I'm in prison. I can do everything in the world to try to earn, to change their view of me and to earn their respect and to earn so much from them that they're going to open that door and set me free. Okay, so that's one way I can try to get free. The other way is I can try to manipulate and control the guards to get free. And the third way is I can try to come up with some way to bust down that door on those huge steel bars. And I'm just going to thrash myself trying to do it that way as well. But what is the only way I can get out of that prison?
What is? I have no idea what you're going to say.
The only way is to accept that there's no way I can get out on my own. And I need to rely on the grace and the mercy of someone much greater than the condemning guards and outside of the prison itself to get free. Now here's the crazy thing. If I don't accept that and realize that, and I stay in that other position where I think I have control over it and I have a way, let's say the President of the United States wants to give me a pardon just out of the goodness of his heart. And I'm in prison and they come and say, okay, the President has given you a pardon. If I hold on to, no, I can do it on my own, I'll actually reject the very thing that sets me free.
Which in this case, God's the one that's saying, I'm going to pardon you
Yes.
here. Just receive the pardon.
Just receive the
Right.
pardon.
Right.
And let's open this door and let me come in there and let's just walk out of there together. And we're not going to leave it there. Let me transform you so you never repeat the things you did that put you in prison.
In the first place.
But let me do the transformation because you don't have the ability to do that. And I love you so much. Let me do that.
So let's get going on walking out of those prisons, because
Yeah.
we know that God has inexhaustible grace for us all, and it's simply asking Him to help us to be able to see that He can unlock those prison doors and we can walk out. I know. I mean, we've all experienced it. So.
And I think the biggest spiritual truth that breaks this down and starts the process is knowing that God has declared you infinitely valuable because He created you. That's the start. It's starting to understand that opens the door to grace. It's not because of what we're accomplishing or because what we didn't accomplish and what we failed at. It's this declaration because God is the source of value. And that starts us on a journey to return to that source of value, knowing God, abiding in God, being one with God. That value and knowing that value is absolutely restored because that is the image of God restored in us when we are adopted back into His family.
It's a great place to end. Let's all say it. We are valuable.
We are valuable because God has declared us to
it
be
so.
valuable. And that's for me, and that's what then I express to everybody I relate to because I truly believe that. And
You're
live in
identifying with that.
Yes, I
Yeah.
identify with that.
That's great.
So,
That's great.
well, we hope this helps expand all of our understanding
Absolutely.
about this really, really life-changing and powerful concept. So,
Yeah.
thanks for watching.